Welcome to Smart Conversations. Enjoy the episode.
And welcome back to another episode of Smart Conversations. Jason and I were chatting around social networks last time and sort of shrinking social networks. And it kind of led on to a conversation around anxieties and social anxieties and fear of being judged. Do you want to explain it a bit better than I can, Jason?
Yeah, I'm sorry to see that you're still experiencing some seismic activity.
Is it happening on this desk as well? Oh my goodness, right.
Should we have an open discussion about your technical issues?
Shall we? Should we point out also I'm at another place and I was very excited to show Jason the desk went up and down.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a radio station tuner. So there may be a few more technical issues, but I will try not to lean on the desk or put my coffee right by the microphone as well.
And we're both at stand-uppy desks today.
I'm sat down, I'm afraid, but I can pretend if you like.
Well, I'm standing for now, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I may have to lower myself suddenly halfway through.
Lower to my standards.
So we thought about following up on our discussion in the last episode, which was about shrinking social networks, and a lot of discussion revolved around social anxiety, didn't it? So we thought it would be quite useful just to think about the types of unhelpful thinking patterns that can contribute to social anxiety in the first place, just to give you a bit of a sense of what's involved, what tends to happen, and perhaps talk a little bit about our experiences and a few suggestions about what you can do about these thinking patterns. Yeah. So we can kick things off by talking about what happens before you go into any kind of social situation, conversation with someone, trip to the shops, through to a meeting at work, whatever it may well be. What tends to happen before you get into the anxiety-provoking situations is the anxiety triggering. And in my experience, it's the anxiety before a social encounter that tends to be the worst, the most severe. I don't know if that's something you've experienced, Rob.
Yeah, it's the feelings or facts thing, I guess, isn't it? Is what you're experiencing in your head a fact or a feeling? It's when you raise this topic, I have to admit, I feel a bit nervous talking about it because it's something which, it's. I came away from my last comment. How were you after the last chat, by the way? I felt, funny enough, I picked the phone up to a few of my best mates and dropped them a little message and just thanked them for being such good friends.
Oh, no, that's nice. No, I was definitely feeling a bit more philosophical about things after the conversation. I don't think I necessarily took any particular actions. But no, it was good to kind of think out loud about my kind of own experiences and, continue to sharpen my focus around, trying to do, to try not to get into those unhelpful patterns. So that's probably what I got out of it.
Yeah, I've had some really nice comments as well and feedback from people who've had a listen and so thank you to those people. Feel free to put it actually in the comments on one of our podcasts or socials. But thank you. That was but
genuine comments, and we're not kind of dreaming up.
Yeah,
I got some nice feedback and some comments as well. So that was really nice to get. So if we think about this, what we call anticipatory anxiety, right? The flash way of just saying anxiety experienced before the social encounter in question.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is that the anxious brain will start to catastrophize, right? And it will start to give you all these scenarios or ways in which the social encounter is going to go wrong. Yeah. And that makes it really difficult then to enter into that situation at all, let alone into the situation feeling relatively calm and stable.
Yeah, and it's when I say about being nervous about it, and it's that feelings or facts thing, because I know I'm hugely guilty of this, and it's something which I've had to get really on top of. Not to say I am by any stretch, but I've had to get a lot better at, because sitting and doing this sort of thing with yourself or appearing on TV or radio, obviously it raises those similar anxieties both before and after. About before, as you say, that fear of if I might mess up, if I might screw up, if I might say something stupid, if I might embarrass myself, and then afterwards, the fear of judgment of what people are going to think and have you said something stupid and are they going to look back and that sort of thing. So looking at that fear you mentioned before, for me it's around a mindset, but around my social anxiety, it doesn't really matter if I'm in an amazing place. I will still get those thought patterns around fear and worry about what's going to happen. And I don't have a lot of negative social interactions. And when you look at the facts and the balance, generally they're positive. But I think whereas before I was really concerned about every single social interaction I had, because it's the people pleasing thing, isn't it? You know, I was so worried about what people would, how it would go, what people would think. If I, like, for instance, I used to work in hospitals, and I train consultants on quite high technical equipment, and I'd find myself, are you still there, Jason? You've frozen on me.
No, I'm still with you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and I'd find myself worrying that I'd forget my information to tell the consultants and stuff. But the fact is, I knew more than them about it. But it didn't mean I didn't spend the whole morning beating myself up and panicking and worrying about that interaction, despite the fact I had. And that's what I say about facts or feelings. I still get a lot of these feelings that, control my fears. But the reality of the facts and my social interactions are normally positive things.
And it demonstrates that possibility versus probability concept we talked about last time, right? So your anxious brain in that situation was thinking, well, what disregard the likelihood. What are all the ways in which this upcoming interaction could go pear-shaped, right? And that's what your anxious brain focuses on, as if all those things are going to happen. So we have that anticipatory anxiety and that tendency to kind of catastrophize. Your anxious brain gets locked in all these kind of possibilities rather than, well, what's likely to happen in this interaction? So that drives some anxiety, as well as having high kind of perceived social standards. So anxiety can increase in situations where someone wants to convey a particular impression, but they're kind of unsure about their ability to pull it off, if that makes sense. And this is something most of us do a lot. You know, I'm going into this meeting with some senior colleagues. I want to look competent. I want to look like I know what I'm talking about, that I'm a safe pair of hands, right? So we often go into a social situation where we're wanting to or hoping to present ourselves in a certain way. There's nothing wrong with that kind of in principle. But when there's an excessive focus and it's really rigid, I must be this perfect, I must put on this perfect performance, but I don't think I'm actually up to it. That can drive a lot of anxiety as well.
Can I, from your side, in terms of with what you do, is that heightened at times? In terms of, do you think you're worried people are expecting something of you, or answers from you, or a certain way from you because of what you do?
So if you think about one of my jobs, so I'm a professor of clinical psychology, right? And it's a role. When I got in there, I was a bit unsure why I got picked for the role. And in the early stages, there certainly was a sense of, I've got to put on a great performance. I've got to look really intelligent. I've got to dazzle people. I've got to give people these epiphanies and these aha moments. Like, I never thought of that, Jason. But thankfully, that kind of faded over time. And now I kind of see myself as someone trying to make a good contribution and add value, rather than being something that's pretty unobtainable.
No, that's interesting. It's something which I've certainly done. And again, going back to being a people pleaser, and the reasons why I had anxiety was worrying about people leaving with a positive interaction with myself and that sort of thing. And since coming into Dudes and Dogs when I first started, I wrongly had the impression I had to be all right all the time and positive all the time, and it was, to say, the wrong impression. But that was my social anxiety and my fear of interactions being negative for people around my behavior, rather than just being my true self. I was trying to be what I thought other people wanted from those interactions.
And setting unrealistically high expectations, you know, in principle, the brain tends to do it because you want to put on a good performance. Like, the intention is good by saying,
always,
I want to do amazing at this, but it's it's differentiating between perfectionism and excellence, right? I want to do this really well, but I don't have to do it perfectly. When you go to perfect, then you, by definition, you're setting yourself up to fail, at least in some way, and you'll fail every time, even when, you know, objectively, if we can measure it that way, that you did perfectly well. So these are the sorts of thinking patterns that can get people into trouble and drive anxiety even before you get into a social situation, right? So that creates this apprehension, what we call this anticipatory anxiety. Okay. So then we can flip into a situation where now you're in the social encounter, and one of the really common things that happen in social anxiety is that people's attention turns inwards towards themselves. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but because you're in a social situation, but actually when you're socially anxious, people tend to turn their attention inwards, right? And the reason people often do this is they're trying to monitor themselves. Yeah. They're trying to keep themselves presented in the way they want to. They're trying to look for signs of anxiety and then try and, you know, squash it or escape before other people kind of realize. There's this trying to monitor yourself for good performance, like, am I standing right? Do I look stupid? Do I look okay? Do I look relaxed? What can I say now which is going to be witty or really kind of interesting, or really kind of add value to the conversation. So people engage in the self-monitoring, sometimes really excessively, to the point where they're no longer really available attention-wise to what's going on around them.
And that would come across to the person they're chatting with as well, right?
You know, it really can do. If you think about social interaction and having a good experience, that's a real killer, right? Because if your attention is overly focused inwards, you're going to miss social cues. You're not going to be able to concentrate particularly on what the person is saying. You're not going to be able to use what they're saying to kind of generate comments, follow-up questions, etc., etc. So this heightened self-focused attention can be really problematic, and in some levels create a self-fulfilling prophecy, because your social performance can kind of reduce a bit if you're not focused on what's going on around you, right? You're just focused on the anxiety. You detect any whiff of anxiety, that becomes a vicious cycle, because going, oh shit, I'm getting anxious, which makes you more anxious.
And it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. I am sorry, I'm just going to put my phone on airplane mode because I've realized I haven't, and I don't want it pinging away over this. I think that's social interaction. If this version of me that was controlled by fear and stuff like that would have gone, well, that's all well and good, but what the fuck am I going to do about it? Because actually I go into that social situation, I still feel anxious. You telling me this doesn't change my anxiety. In my case, it doesn't stop me wanting to be physically sick on occasion, you know, or something like that. It doesn't stop my hands shaking or trembling, and it doesn't stop that trail of thought. So what can I do as someone who struggles with those situations if that is me, and to help me in those situations? Yeah.
So if we think about it, if your attention is excessively focused inwards, one really straightforward strategy, at least in principle, is to consciously direct your attention outwards. Okay. And you can do that through very basic kind of mindful type strategies or observational strategies. So really take detailed notice of what another person's kind of wearing, or what their body posture is, what their body language is. Really focus in on what they're saying, not just the words, but that intonation and, you know, the rise and fall in volume and pitch and whatnot. And really kind of bury yourself, I guess, in the moment, of what's going on outside your body, right?
So overly focus almost.
It's really, well, I think to do well socially, there has to be that balance of monitoring of yourself, or attention inwards and attention outwards. The thing with social anxiety is that excessive attention is usually placed inwards, and really to get the balance right, because you're so used to all the attention being inwards, it can feel like you've gone completely the other way initially. Right. but probably what you're doing is just kind of trying to re-establish a healthy balance between that inward and outward attention. Your anxious brain is going to keep wanting to pull you back inside your body. Yep. So at starting point, as a general rule of thumb, often it can be quite good to say, I'm just going to try and totally focus on what's going on around me.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a strategy that you can adopt. Yeah. Okay. I mean, when I've been socially anxious, this is something I've really noticed. I've been very focused on my physical posture, body language, appearance. Yeah. Sit more relaxed, sit straight, and I end up looking like a complete idiot.
Do you ever find yourself doing it on this podcast?
What's wrong with Jason? Sorry?
Do you ever find yourself doing it on this podcast?
Only the millisecond after you said that.
No, I'm going to put it. I've been really conscious every time I slurp on my coffee not to be making a noise or looking stupid. But you're right. It's for me. It's I overthink about my hands or my arms and what I'm doing with them at that particular time, or it might be as you say, posture. I've never thought about it until you said it, but I think about what I look like physically. How is my face responding? Do my eyes look angry? Do they look welcoming? Yeah. That sort of thing. You're right. It's very much focused on the physical.
Absolutely. And what you can do is focus that attention outwards rather than trying to quote unquote correct your body posture. Now, as soon as you've lost focus and attention on your body posture, you no longer care about it, right? Because you're not thinking about it. So when you're having a comfortable conversation with someone, are you thinking about how I'm standing or sitting? What are my facial expressions like? What do I do with my hands, my arms, my legs? Or are you just doing it? It's like kind of driving a car, right? If you're an experienced driver, you don't actually think about all the little bits and pieces or the little skills and procedures you got to follow. You just kind of do it. And so one of the nice things about the strategy of directing your attention outwards, it can help kind of retrain the brain to focus on other things. And then you've got more attentional bandwidth to focus on what's really matters, which is using, the information around you, what people are saying, and their body language, posture, and whatnot. Yeah. So it can take a bit of practice, but that's a really good thing to try. Yeah. Okay.
That sounds handy. Yeah. Something else. Go on.
We've got also, when you're in the moment, people have a negative self-perception.
I was going to say it's quite often the case, isn't it? It's how you view yourself at that particular time.
Yeah. And this element of social anxiety can have quite historical origins. Yep. So we talk to people who have poor self-image, low self-esteem, whatever you want to call it. Often people talk about struggling with that for many years. Yeah. And that becomes kind of like a vulnerability, if you like, to social anxiety for some people.
I'm quite happy to use me as an example here, mate, because this is feeling quite close to home with what you're describing as well.
Well, so just as
we discussed obviously on the last podcast, so it's, my opinion of self was very low, and as a result, most of my social interactions, I was pretty convinced people left with a negative impression of me because of what was going on up top.
Yeah, and I've certainly struggled with that issue myself. And in the context of social anxiety, the additional element, which is quite important to bear in mind here, is that negative self-perception extends to what you believe other people expect of you.
Yeah. Okay.
So you tend to, in social anxiety, people tend to believe that their qualities, their attributes fall short of what others are expecting of you.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So we talked about the fear of negative evaluation as being really central to social anxiety, and here we can see some real connections or some real links to that fear, that real drive of social anxiety. If you're in a social encounter and you genuinely believe that I'm not as kind of interesting or funny or witty, as intelligent as what other people expect me to be, that's not going to make you feel very comfortable.
No.
Yeah. And so you kind of form this negative mental image of yourself.
If you're not
on how I view myself, but how I believe others are potentially going to size me up or evaluate me.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. And it's to say, I knew this part of the conversation would be a little bit uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
around because of self-opinion. Funnily enough, I've got I'm coaching tonight I'm joining the coaching set from a lads under 13s rugby club, and I am so nervous about it. Despite being a load of 13-year-olds, as an adult, I should be confident and relaxed. I'm terrified about putting myself out there. So in that social situation where actually it's, again, looking at the facts and the feelings for me, the fact is Frank's played for this rugby team for 5 years. I know all the parents really well. I know the coaches really well. I've kind of been coaching away anyway for the last couple of years, and this is just kind of making it a bit more official. So those are the facts, but the feelings are, God, I haven't played rugby since I was in my teens. Everyone's always going to be on me. So those are my sort of meeting feelings, if you like. So what could I do in those situations to not feel that way?
So there's a few things you can do here. Now, if you believe that you kind of fall short in the eyes of other people, one thing you can do is just kind of ask yourself, well, what clear evidence do I have that people believe I don't measure up or make this type of evaluation of me?
Yep.
That works really well for some people, not so well for other people. Some people go, well, no, there is no clear evidence. You know, has anyone directly said something to you? You know, do you get these comments on a regular basis like, Jason, you are a real letdown, mate? You know? And so asking for kind of
I thought you were going to be way funnier.
Exactly. So you can kind of ask yourself, well, what clear evidence do I have for this? Because essentially what you're doing is mind reading, right? You're assuming you know the contents of another person's mind.
Yes.
Yeah. As far as I know, I have not met anyone who's literally able to do that. Or I'm sure there's a few people on the planet who do think they can read minds.
I've watched Darren Brown, right?
It's another topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's something you can do. Another thing you can do is just kind of think about past successes. You know, when I've kind of done well socially, bring those examples to mind, and just kind of be inspired, motivated by your having shown that ability to perform well in social situations. Think about times where you've got positive feedback from other people, right? So those are just a few examples. There's all sorts of things you can do, but
I guess. It goes back to what the first podcast we did, in fact, I think, where we spoke about, it was so long ago, where we spoke about understanding which part of your brain's talking to you and sending out these messages, because this isn't irrational brain saying all these things, you know, in these social anxiety situations. This is your chimp brain or your panic brain or whatever you want to call it. It's actually reprocessing and understanding, if you look at it with your rational brain, how does it look differently to what I'm envisaging?
Yeah. And often we're looking at psychological interventions through to kind of therapy with a kind of professional. What we're trying to do under hood is kind of connect those two bits of our brain, right, so they can talk to each other. So with anxiety, you can think of, you know, the anxious brain or the alarm brain. It's well-intentioned.
Absolutely.
Firing off these false alarms, you know, time. It doesn't see that I'm thinking in terms of possibility rather than probability. It can't tell or spot the fact that I'm mind reading, and actually I can't literally do that. Now, other people might think bad things about me, and you know, you live long enough, that is going to happen eventually for everyone. Because you just can't you can't keep everyone happy. Not everyone's gonna like you. But in general, you know, people don't think bad things about you. You know, they're not going to be having these thoughts. It's the fear of these thoughts which is the thing that's going on, rather than the actual negative evaluation. So those are the sorts of things you can start doing.
And actually, what you said about mind reading is really important, because it's kind of that's kind of the whole crux of the matter, isn't it? Is that, so just as an example, mind reading situation might be that you phone your boss at work in the morning, and they pick up the phone and they're short with you, and you start speculating in your head as to why that might be. Oh, it's because I did this, I did that. And actually there's 1,000,001 reasons, including he's just had a shit night or whatever it might be. Then that's what mind reading is. It's putting your thoughts or worries into someone else, right? And that impression of you.
Assuming you know the contents of someone else's thoughts, right? And so you can go from they think I'm uninteresting to well, I fear that they think I'm uninteresting, but I don't know for sure. I can't read their mind. That's an improvement. You don't have to say, oh, they all think I'm bloody amazing, because that's also mind reading in an overly positive direction. So what we want is kind of a balance where we go, well, yeah, this is something I do fear, but I don't have any clear evidence and I can't actually read their mind. So it may or may not be the case. Going from they definitely think I'm stupid through to, well, I fear this, but I really don't know for sure what they think unless I ask them. That, from an anxiety perspective, is a much better position. You don't have to go, everyone thinks I'm bloody amazing. And in fact, that can be quite
very Alan Partridge, the way you said that.
Yeah.
Bloody amazing.
I love it. So that you can just come from an extreme position to something that's less extreme, and that's often the name of the game, especially in the early stages of trying to tackle social anxiety.
And actually, do you know what? Now you've said it, getting on top of mind reading, and maybe this is the biggest subject, is so vital in terms of managing social anxiety. The more I think about it, if I think about every discussion we've had on here, mind reading is a big part of why you create those social anxieties and worries. When we talk about friendships, the reason you don't reach out to someone is because you're worried they might think you're a dick for not being in touch. Reality is they're probably thinking they've been a dick for not being in touch, or they're not thinking anything about it at all. And it's it's a really important thing. And maybe to say there's something we could do around our techniques on sort of trying to get out of that mindset, because I know I've been guilty of it in the past. I know I can still be. It's not something you suddenly go, I don't do it anymore.
Yeah, we can definitely do a deep dive into some of these techniques. We're just giving people a flavour for what's kind of available for managing social anxiety, and the fact that there is stuff you can do about this.
There's lots you can do, and that's the key message. But it comes down to taking responsibility for it, doesn't it? And still needing help, but taking responsibility and saying, do you know what? This, for me, the thing with social anxiety is until I started looking at my social anxieties and what it caused and the behaviour patterns it caused, I didn't really understand how damaging it was to me. And I don't think you do understand how damaging it is until you actually take responsibility and look at it properly. And it doesn't mean to say that social anxiety goes, but it means you learn techniques so you don't become governed by it.
And with a kind of a chronic or a longer term anxiety issue, you can lose sight of it in terms of its impact and its pervasiveness, right? That's quite common as well. People just find ways to deal with it and live with it, even though it makes them feel pretty uncomfortable and can make life really miserable. A couple of things, just a couple of other thinking patterns that I'll just mention. One is around kind of standards and performance and the related cost of performing badly in your own estimation. So what happens in social anxiety is that people tend to say a thing or think things like, if I mess up in some way, it's going to be absolutely disastrous. So if I fumble over my words in this presentation, they're going to think I'm completely incompetent and going to want to fire me, right? So this is something else to be on the lookout for. That it's a high estimated cost of feared outcomes occurring. And something you can do there is acknowledge that your brain is kind of catastrophizing as a way to really grab your attention, say, don't let this happen. But what you can do is think about, well, what is the reality of social encounters? They're messy, they're full of all sorts of errors and slip-ups and mistakes. Like, we've been talking and I've fumbled over my words a few times. We've kind of talked over the top of each other unintentionally a little bit. So if we're incredibly socially anxious with each other, we might think, oh, holy shit, Rob's going to absolutely kind of hate me. He's going to think I'm a real knob because I kind of talked over him and I didn't articulate statement X really beautifully. So,
and you didn't laugh that much at my Alan Partridge impression. I'm
really laughing on the inside pretty intense. That makes me feel
amazing.
So there's a high estimated social cost of making a mistake or something going wrong. And so you can kind of bring that back, as I said, by thinking, well, what's the reality of social interactions? And when I've slipped up in the past, has something catastrophic happened? Has someone completely disowned me? Has someone really launched at me and abused me for not telling the funniest joke of the night?
No, that's such a key point. If I look back at things that I have avoided or not done that I regret not doing afterwards, it's because of exactly what you've just described. It's fear of outcome. It's fear of loss of what's the impact going to be. It's like, it's if I do that, what's the worst case scenario? And in a panicked mind or a socially anxious mind, you find the worst thing and find a reason not to do something. And if you can take anything from watching this, that's a great takeaway for me is getting on top of that, because speaking from experience, I've missed out on so many things that I would have really loved and enjoyed because I was scared, basically.
Yeah, and really common, Rob. You're part of a very large, illustrious group of people. Yeah. One more thing I'll just mention is after the social encounter. So there's other thinking patterns. We've not done anything. We've tried to give people some of the main themes, right? But what can happen is psychologists have this flash term, post-event rumination.
Right, rumination.
Yeah, which is a prolonged and awful post-mortem of the social encounter, right? So this is really problematic for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons why it's particularly problematic is because of the fact that you are socially anxious, you are scared, you're configured to recall the social encounter in a negative way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're not going to look for, that conversation went quite smoothly, or, that was an interesting chat, or I think I made a good point there, or I felt relaxed in that moment. You're looking for all the ways in which you think it went wrong.
Yeah.
So suddenly, a social encounter that's probably perfectly fine, on retrospect, gets kind of reconfigured by your brain, your socially anxious brain, thinking, oh, that was awful. And so we have a continuation, intensification of the anxiety, and that just feeds into the next social encounter. We go, oh, last time this was horrendous, I did a terrible job here, it's going to be awful again. So that post-event rumination is really, really important, and something that particularly highly socially anxious people tend to do a lot of.
Okay, first of all, rumination makes a lot more sense than what I first heard, which was rumination. So I'm glad I got the R correct. This is something which fascinates me because I am so guilty of this. Is it common?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really critical, and it brings together lots of things we know about social anxiety, the thinking biases, where you direct your attention, the way memory can go all wonky because of the anxiety. Yeah,
this is 100% true, by the way. If you're watching this and thinking, no, I'm just crap in social situations, and looking back, this is where doing podcasts and TV and stuff has, despite the fact it triggered a lot of my social anxiety, has been really good for me. Because I think I've told a story before, and I won't tell it again, about when I was in the States and I said one line which I realized upset someone. And for 2 years, despite never meeting the bloke, I tried to look him up on Facebook so I could apologize and all sorts. It's overanalyzing and could do nothing about it. And I do it all the time. I worry afterwards. These podcasts and doing TV shows have been really healthy. Like we went on Island AM a couple of months back in Ireland, which is like their breakfast TV show. And I felt afterwards I'd done crap. It was the first bit of TV I'd done in a while, so I was feeling the nerves. But I was saying to myself, you know what? Again, positive self-talk. I was going, I've done this before. I've done TV shows. I've come across really well. You can do it. Just focus on your points. Blah blah blah. But afterwards, I went through that post-rumination, as you say, and was going through. It was a crap interview. I can't believe I've just done that on national TV. It was this. It was that. It was this. And I couldn't watch it. And I finally sat down and made myself. Do you know what? It was a great interview. It was absolutely fine. But I'd convinced myself. And I do it with these podcasts sometimes. I left the last podcast actually thinking I'd said something really stupid. And like watching it back, it's like, no, do you know what? You haven't. You put these thoughts into your heads. And even if you have, what's going to happen? Someone's going to go, what's he on about? Laugh and carry on watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's showing that kind of high perceived social cost of making mistake, but that we talked about earlier. And myself, found it quite difficult to listen back to myself, and also try and spread the word that we've recorded the episodes.
Yeah,
so that triggers some social anxiety in me. Like, as I said to you, I've made the joke a few times, someone's going to think, oh, there's another schmo doing yet another podcast, right? But that's illustrating all the types of unhelpful thinking
exactly
occur with social anxiety.
And if someone is thinking that, so what? They think that, and then they move on to find a different podcast, and that doesn't affect me or you or how we go about our days, and nor should it. It's
and someone will, if the word gets out to enough people, someone's going to think something.
I mean, the Australian nation is going to automatically be against us anyway, so there's a whole country we can rule out.
Australian nation. Yeah, they love to hate us Kiwis sometimes.
Yeah. Are you North Island or South Island?
North Island.
So does that rule the South Island out as well?
No, all the New Zealand is a country, as you know, it's the greatest country on Earth.
It's hard to argue.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway.
We've got lots of thinking patterns that we didn't kind of get into. That's fine. And the other thing we didn't touch on, which is really important, is the behavioral element of social anxiety. Because there's all sorts of behavior patterns that are tied in with the thoughts that contribute as well. So maybe we can talk about that at some stage, but we'd love to get people's kind of ideas about what they want to hear about, learn about, etc. We're more than happy to oblige. We'd be great to get some help generating some topics.
It would be. I mean, the behaviour one would be really interesting because I know, like I said before, I've been guilty of some really poor behaviour and patterns. So that would be a really interesting one. But yeah, please do. It'd be great to hear your thoughts and actually talk about something that other people want to raise as well. Yeah,
lovely. Well, probably about time to wrap that up, Rob.
Probably time for another smooth sign off.
Smooth. It's becoming our trademark, isn't it?
I know. I can't edit them out now. I'm once someone signed us up, mate, and signed us to a Spotify contract, they may ask us to adjust it. But until then,
we're going to keep it authentic until then.
Indeed, mate. Good to chat as always.
Yeah, good to chat.
Nice to see you.
See you soon.
That went all right.